this program is being recorded, as I just announced. Also, maybe we are waiting for the Zoom error to end. Also, if you want to access this closed captioning, please click on the live transcript button on your screen. And finally, after we hear from our candidate, and I think Nancy, I don't know if you'll probably add some words as well, our candidates. I will moderate a Q&A session. Please do not unmute yourself until I ask you to do so, and make sure your questions are succinct so we can get to as many as possible. Alternatively, you can put your questions in the chat and I will ask them. As a 501c3, the JCRC does not endorse or oppose candidates for public office, but these meetings are critical to our mission to educate the Jewish community and provide civic participation. JCRC serves as the public affairs arm of the Washington Jewish community, and we represent 100 organizations, synagogues, and schools, as well as the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, and we advocate for the needs and values of the Jewish community and the well-being of everyone in the region, including the most vulnerable. Now let me introduce our guests. From 2010 to 2018, Rushern Baker served as Prince George's County Executive. In his 8 years as County Executive, he changed a once stagnant county into a vibrant, successful, nationally recognized government and awarded model of how focused, thoughtful, and collaborative leadership can transform communities, government, and lives. Under his leadership, he dramatically improved the county's economy, lowered its crime rate, improved its school system, rebuilt the executive branch, which was plagued by corruption. Rushern Baker's achievements led Governing Magazine to recognize him in 2013 for his leadership, and led his peers to elect him to 2 terms as the chair of the County Executives of America, which is no surprise of those of us who have worked with him. Since leaving office, Baker has launched a National Leadership Institute for local government chief executives with the University of Maryland School for Public Policy, and is the CEO of the Baker Strategy Group, which advises clients in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Most importantly, to take the measure of the man, I want to recognize that Rushern Baker has dedicated his life's work to his wonderful wife, Krista, for whom he was the primary caregiver until she passed away last September after a lengthy battle with early onset Alzheimer's. And of course, our condolences and our thoughts are with you, Rushern, as you struggle through that. Through that life cycle event and the loss of your wife. Can only imagine how it feels, and our thoughts are with you. Also this morning is Rushern Baker's running mate, Councilmember Nancy Navarro, a Venezuelan-American legislator, the first Latina to serve on the Montgomery County Council. Prior to her service on the County Council, she served on the Montgomery County Board of Education for 5 years. And before entering office, she founded a nonprofit that was geared towards aiding economic and educational development for Latino and other immigrant communities. She was elected to represent District 14 on the Montgomery County Council in a special election and was reelected 3 times. She has served twice as president, once as vice president, and she's been a very strong and efficient leader, and I've had the pleasure of working with her, and she's been a great representative for our Jewish community. She has focused her leadership on economic development and self-sufficiency, racial equity and social justice, civic engagement, early care and education, and reimagining public safety. Deborah, or if I'm going to ask that if we can once again send our email out to everybody else who hasn't got it, just so they can get a second chance to get on, and Rushern, take it away. The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, Ron, thank you for having me, and JCRC, thank you for having us this morning, and yes, we're probably all are zoomed out at this point. I know my running mate is, because the council's been in Zoom session for almost 2 years now. But, you know, I appreciate this opportunity. Of course, our relationship goes back not just when I was county executive, but as a delegate. And so the tremendous work you've done in the Washington region, both Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and all around, I've been pleased to be part of it as a delegate and as a county executive. You know, I was looking through my notes from 4 years ago when we spoke, and what was surprising not surprising, what was different as I looked through the notes and the issues we talked about was something that we didn't talk about last time, and that's pretty much in the forefront, and that is the rise of anti-Semitic activity throughout this nation and even in this region. As early as a couple of weeks ago in Bowie, one of our most diverse place in Prince George's County, saw anti-Semitic signs in neighborhoods. Now, this is, just think about it. This is a place where we pride ourselves in our diversity, both in terms of religion and race. And to have those things come up kind of speaks to the point where why I got back into, running. As you said, when I left in 2018, quite honestly, I felt pretty good about the public service I had done in Maryland. I had served 8 years in the House of Delegates on Judiciary, Judge May, one of my favorite committees, and on appropriations. I was blessed to have great tutors like Pete Rawlins, but made great friends like the person who introduced me last time, Peter Krausner, Judge Krausner. And then,
by the way, sends his wishes, but said he could not get up this early because he's in California and he loves you, but he's not getting up at 5 o'clock for anybody.
I love him, and I don't blame him. And then, as county executive, dealing with some very critical issues at the same time, I was caring for my wife. So quite honestly, I wanted to use the time after I left office to deal with public policy and to deal with, spend time with my wife. But then the pandemic happened, and then George Floyd happened. And at those two things, in working with executives from around this nation, one of them being County Executive Fitzgerald in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, where we saw anti-Semitic activities, working with those executives, but also looking at what happened in Minnesota and what was happening, not just in this state, but in this nation.
Yep.
And I remember the conversation, having it with my wife at the time, who did not speak, but we were quarantined away from our adult kids. And I remember seeing all this going on and thinking to myself, and I said to her, I'm so happy I'm not county executive having to deal with this. And then I could see her response to me, which was, well, what are you doing? Just think about all the things that I've learned as a legislator and as a county executive dealing with these very critical issues. I just simply couldn't sit back and not actually try and use the things that I've learned to move this state. And by moving this state, moving this nation forward. I mean, we are in a unique opportunity, not just in history, but in location. As a most diverse state on the East Coast, we have a chance to show the rest of the nation, by proximity to the nation's capital, of what we can do. And so for me, getting back into this meant that I wanted to do it in a way where we could actually speak truth to power. Having served for a number of years, that the one thing that we all know is what gets in the way of actually being able to speak truth to power is spending your time trying to raise money from corporations, special interests, and things like that. But I wanted to actually talk to people. And I also wanted a running mate, not based on geography or gender, but someone that I felt confident could actually run the state and help me run the state, not just win a campaign. And so I really only had one person in mind, somebody I respected tremendously, who had done great work on the school board and in Montgomery County, but someone I had worked with on healthcare issues, and raising a minimum wage, but also inclusion and diversity. And so I knew Councilwoman Navarro was coming to the end of her term, and probably like most of us, after dedicating your whole life to public service, both elected and in the nonprofit world, I knew that she probably wanted an opportunity just to rest. But this is a critical time for all of us, and I think it requires that those who actually know how to govern step up to the forefront. And so, by way of introduction, I want to say this. One of the things that we're most proud about this ticket, if you look at it, most of the time when you have a diverse ticket, especially people of color, usually people talk about the fact that while they may be smart, they usually lack the experience of dealing with critical, complex issues. That's not the case in this ticket. You have two people with the most experience of any ticket that's running in the two most populous counties in the state, and the two most diverse and two most complex. You've got Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. And so I would use that as an introduction to my running mate, somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and someone I know that you worked with in the past, Councilwoman Nancy Navarro, for opening statement.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for this invitation. Thank you, Ron, JCRC. Thank you for everything that you do. You are such a strong partner here in Montgomery County and throughout the region. And as Rushern just articulated, these are very unique times. These are very difficult times. Here in Montgomery County, we have navigated this pandemic, and we have all really stepped up. I mean, our residents have really stepped up in extraordinary ways, and we're still trying to discern exactly what the aftermath, what this sort of new normal is looking like. And we could not have done this without the partnership of community organizations like JCRC. As Rushern said, Nancy Navarro, council member, had the pleasure and the honor of representing District 4 on the County Council since 2009, where we have a very strong Jewish community in the area of Kent Mill. And I've had the pleasure to work very closely with this community as well as the rest of the Jewish communities throughout the county. I've had the pleasure of being president twice of the Montgomery County Council and really, truly work in partnership to address so many different issues. And as Rushern was saying, the pandemic coupled with the George Floyd murder, coupled with a very divisive previous president, all of that came together in the last 2 years to put quite a bit of stress and, in my opinion, destabilize a lot of what we held very dear, which was the strength of our institutions, the strength of our democracy. And so at the same time that I was really looking forward to my end of a very wonderful service on the Montgomery County Council, I really had to reflect quite a bit about what I wanted to do next. And having raised my daughters here, been married for 30 years, they're both gainfully employed and they're very happy young adults. I too had the same sort of realization that Rushern had, which was that we're at an inflection point. We've seen the rise of hate. We have seen the rise of anti-Semitism. We have seen the fragility of the safety in our communities. We have seen how difficult it is, no matter where you look, there always seems to be a situation that we have to address. Things that we thought we had taken care of, the people have fought so hard, are still under threat. However, we also have extraordinary opportunities. And that's what an inflection point looks like. And so for me, I have to tell you that it was that resiliency, and it was really that inspiration of working with your community, for example, to put forth a zoning text amendment so that Bikor Cholim could be established, and co-sponsoring that with my colleague Andrew Friedson so a kitchen could be included. Making sure that the Berman Academy was there to provide the kind of education that this community held dear, at the same time, really addressing very important amenities and quality of life issues in communities like Kent Mill, like the park at Kent Mill. That was something everybody really wanted. And of course, redistricting, which had split that community, that was also very important. But most importantly is that any time there was some kind of threat elsewhere in the country, to your community, we always came together. We always made sure that we would hold hands, all of us, this extraordinary diverse county. And we always stepped up and provided the funds necessary for security, because we know that we have to take care of each other. We understand that. And so that's what we want to do at the state level. We want to be able to model that experience can come together with extraordinary diversity and build bridges. We want to be able to be innovative and really usher in a new level, a new day, a new phase for our state, but that it is grounded in experience. Because I have to tell you, I've been in the trenches with this pandemic in particular, where we didn't have a manual. We were just thrown into this national global emergency as elected officials, making decisions that really had a life or death consequence. And we had to come together, again, as a community, very little sleep, to respond very quickly, to protect lives. And so this is not a moment for people who have not had that kind of experience. This is a moment, again, of extraordinary opportunities, but also it's a very fragile situation as well. And so for me, joining Rushern Baker, who has a really amazing track record, the first thing and the most important thing for me was who he was as a person, his qualities as a human being, somebody who has been steady throughout, in the face of this illness of his wife, always very steady, always there to step up. He's the kind of person that looks at you in the eye. He's not the kind of person that in a crowded room is going to be looking to see who else he needs to talk to. That for me was very important. But then his experience as a delegate and as a county executive who really truly changed the trajectory in Prince George's County. Not an easy thing to do. I also serve on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. I'm the president of their corporate board, and we would have these conversations throughout and seeing how Prince George's County really changed completely to now become an economic activity center. That is not something that you just do overnight. Many people thought they could do it and they didn't achieve it. So to me, that was something very critical. Joining forces, I think the two of us are absolutely the best and the right ticket for this moment in time in Maryland. And so thank you so much for inviting us to talk to you. I think the fact that we are also the only ones participating in public campaign financing, a program that I helped usher here in Montgomery County as I chair the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, and understanding that all those threats that we talked about, one common denominator has to do with dark money. And so that's why we made that decision, because we feel that if this is going to be an inflection point, then you have to do what is absolutely right to set the example and role model what needs to happen when you envision a different future. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the opportunity to talk to you and answer your questions.
Thank you. If anybody would like to have a question, they can please put it inside the chat. But I wanted to start with one question that I've enjoyed asking to almost each candidate. So the Baker Navarro ticket has just concluded 8 years of serving as governor and lieutenant governor. Nancy's getting ready to run for governor now. She's just finished her 8 years. And you're looking back and there's 3 things that you want to be able to tell everybody you've accomplished. Like if there's, when the legacy of the Baker Navarro administration is written in Maryland's textbooks and students now look back, you want to say, we accomplished the following 3 things. Forget about all the, 3 things, 3 big things, 3 big transformative changes that you want to be able to say you got done. And I'm opening it up to both of you. What would you like to be able to tell? What would you like the history books to record?
I'll start first. The same thing, that I said about Prince George's County when I left. Number one is that residents and citizens of this great state will have more confidence in the government to actually deliver on their behalf. Because that's usually the hardest thing to get people to buy into. People are jaded about government being able to actually perform and do the work. And so transforming that so people believe in it, that means that, people will believe in the policies. Number 2, and I think it's the most important thing, outside of our education system, and that's Baltimore City. That the jewel, the largest city in Maryland, our calling card around the world, is vibrant and productive, and people feel safe and heard. That would be, number 2. And then number 3, that we have a quality public education throughout this state. I can only pick 3, so I won't put healthcare on there, but it would be on there. But
I'll give you an extra one, Rushern. You can have one.
So educating and healthcare. What I found as an executive, the most important issue, and we actually elevated it to number 1, was healthcare. And it wasn't just because my wife was ill and I got to see it firsthand. It was because when we studied our problems in our public education system and in public safety, we always came back to the fact that it had to do with healthcare and access to quality healthcare, whether it's behavioral health, whether it's mental health, whether it's family health. All of those had strains on the family that if we could actually provide those to folks, we could reduce the other 2. which is what we did in Prince George's County. So those would be, I'm cheating, those would be my 4. Nancy.
Nancy, anything you want to add?
Sure. I mean, I think that for me, obviously, and the reason why I joined the stick is because I would like to make sure that when I look back, we have a state that is prosperous, that has opened those opportunities and the access to opportunities to everyone, no matter where you live in the state, and that is rooted in racial equity and social justice, because then that is what helps our quality of life. We have way too many disparities that we saw come front and center during this pandemic, and they're in every single aspect. And so we learned that unless we address these disparities, we are never going to really secure high quality of life for everybody. So to me, it would be looking back and seeing that prosperity, that economic development, that workforce development, access to all those opportunities, and really having put in place systems that have addressed the elimination of many of those persistent disparities that continue to affect negatively our quality of life.
Let me ask you, one of the things that JCRC, whether the Jewish community does successfully as we operate, I know you've been to our facilities, Rushern, and I know you've been to our facilities, Nancy, many times. So we operate a network of non-sectarian social service agencies. They all have the word Jewish or Hebrew or Charles E. Smith in the front name, but they're open to the community, and many of the people we serve are not Jewish. In fact, in some of our organizations, the majority of our clientele are not Jewish. When we go to the state and we ask for capital funding, I've been at JCRC for 25 years. We've secured millions and millions of dollars in capital funding. But when we think of our organizations, we think of mostly, not exclusively, but mostly, state is where you go for capital money, and the county is where you go for some operating dollars. And one of the things that I think has frustrated the nonprofit sector, which in many ways is doing increasingly the work of what government used to do, is finding that they can't get budgets, whether it's money to pay for direct care workers at the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, or nursing assistants at Charles E. Smith Life Communities, or whether it's, we need more money for social workers. I mean, I've always thought about this. If you pay a social worker $100,000 a year between benefits package and everything, you could be getting 30 to 40 women out of a domestic abusive situation. And the reality is, and Kathleen knows, that was one of her major efforts when she was as a lawyer, and also when she was on her committee, was domestic abuse legislation. What can we do to change the nature so that the state can start becoming more of an investor in the actual operating dollars of our agencies, and not just giving us bricks and mortar when we're trying to take care of people? Bricks and mortar are nice, but what we need is the personnel to actually provide the care.
Well, the first thing is to elect Baker Navarro. I'd say that tongue in cheek, but really, I mean it. And here's why. I mean, just think about the things that you've just talked about. One, Nancy and I both come from a nonprofit background, not a huge nonprofit, one that's right on the ground. For me, it was in DC, providing social services, providing support for women at that time, this tells you my age, who were called recently incarcerated, that were coming back to the DC area, and providing housing and shelter in the District of Columbia. And the biggest thing, just like you said, is that we could get money for, programmatic, but we couldn't get money for operating. And it was frustrating for us because we couldn't hire the staff we needed to deliver that. Now, I tell people all the time, I just spoke to a nonprofit group, the best training I had for county executive was at the nonprofit level. Because when I became county executive, and I saw, especially at the time I took over in Prince George's County, where our economy had collapsed. We had $130 million budget deficit for Prince George's County. And so the stopgap measures were really the nonprofit agencies. We also had the state at the time, not providing enough funding for us at the local level for social workers, for our health department. And so we relied on the nonprofit network. And so what I made as a priority, as somebody who served there and now in a position of being executive and know what this is like, is that we actually started providing funding for not only training and support in the nonprofit area, but also those that were really filling in the gap like you do in our community. And so for us, and I'll let Nancy speak, for us as an administration, both coming from that background, coming from it in this area, you know, having to deal with it in the Washington region and in the state of Maryland, which is very different than doing it elsewhere. I also headed up a national nonprofit out of New York. But so as governor, what we're going to do, especially, you know, especially doing what you just said, Ron, is that's an investment. And that's what I said to council members. I said, we're going to invest in these nonprofits so that they can help us do the work that we either can't do or shouldn't do, quite honestly. But it has to be not just in bricks and mortars. It has to be in the, you know, in the not just in services, not just giving it when you provide service, but also in the operation part of it, because that's really where we need the help. They can take on the responsibility and help us. So we will do that as an administration. Nancy.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would add that, you know, we have had to rely very heavily on our nonprofit partners, but the truth is that that's why I decided to run for office. My very first job in Columbia, Missouri, 21 years old, was working in an organization, nonprofit organization that, you know, made home visits to our elderly community members who could still be at home. And it was a very tiny organization. And so then when I made the decision to launch a nonprofit organization, it really started as a project, and it was to help mostly immigrant women, Latino women, become licensed family child care providers, because there were way too many Latino women caring for children without license. And we all know that that has an effect on school readiness. And so it started as a project, and soon it became a nonprofit organization. But boy, was it hard. You know, I mean, it was difficult to find space, to get the funding. And actually, there were 4 nonprofit organizations at that time that had just started. And we came together to put forth a proposal that eventually became the Nonprofit Village. And that co-location concept. I mean, we're talking, you know, 24 years ago when that began. So I've been on both sides. And that's why I'm such a fierce advocate for our nonprofit organizations and appropriate funding. Because many times people will say, and we say that a lot in the government, right? Yeah, you're partners, and it would be so much more expensive if we did it. Well, yes, but people need to be paid appropriately. You know, employees need those benefits. They need to be paid on time. I mean, there's just so many things that we take for granted as if it's not an actual small business or a large business. It is in that respect. And so no doubt that, you know, both Rushern and I come forward with that sensitivity of understanding what it means to not just, you know, run a large organization, a large nonprofit, but also the pains when you're just starting and the barriers, so that we can address those and be a lot more targeted and strategic. I think it's also important to recognize those organizations that have best practices, that have yield the kind of results we want, and help them scale up. I mean, I think that's a mistake sometimes that is made, is that, you know, we don't help organizations take that jump to the next level, even though they're providing extraordinary services with incredible results. So that would definitely be a priority for us. We know that there is no way that the government can do this, especially in a state that is as diverse as ours. That is really important, because you have the trust in community, and that is exactly what we need.
let me ask, we have a question here from Jay Miller saying, I can see your ticket doing well in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, which is Rushern with Nancy, what we discussed over breakfast at the Hot Spot Silver Diner, which is, by the way, if you ever want to meet all the candidates running for office, everybody, my secret after 25 years is just go to breakfast every day in the Silver Diner for 1 week. You will meet every elected official in Montgomery County. The question was, I can see your ticket doing well in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, but how will you get the residents of the Eastern Shore and the Panhandle, which are more conservative, to support you? I think it's an interesting political question.
Yeah, and I think it's one we're uniquely situated, quite honestly, to actually not only answer, but also to get votes there. What I've found in my travels, not just as a candidate for governor or as county executive, as Nancy said, we serve on these committees. I serve on, MACO's board when I was county executive. So I'm working with executive and commissioners from around the state. But in appropriation, I know Judge Dumais had to get off this call, but in the legislature on appropriation, you actually have to travel to every part of the state so you understand what the issues are that are facing the residents in the Eastern Shore or Western Maryland, because we had to decide how the money was going to be split up. And as somebody who served on the Spending Affordability Committee and the Capital Committee, I had to do that. The other thing is not only understanding the region, the state, having served time here and dealing with these folks from across the state, is that what I've learned when I've traveled to my friends out in, especially out in Western Maryland, let's just use them for example. Just think about it. Under a Republican administration, the folks in Western Maryland wanted to leave Maryland and join West Virginia, whose economy we all know is, it's near the bottom, because they felt unheard. And they felt unheard not because of conservative values. They felt unheard because, one, their school system is going through the same traumatic problems that we see in our very diverse and large county. Whether it's Montgomery County or whether it's Prince George's County, we have to deal with that. They want to leave because they felt like nobody understands how do you create jobs so that we don't lose our young population of people who we want to stay here in this region. Well, we face that whether you're in Montgomery County or Prince George's County, the southern part of our county or some of our inner beltway areas, folks, we have to actually provide those type of job creations. And so our message to every part of the state is there's not a single issue that you're going to say you're concerned about that we haven't had to deal with it. And most of that is public safety, economic development, and healthcare, which are the three critical issues I had to deal with as county executive. No one running for governor has actually had to deal with those issues in this state, and all three at once. We both have. And I think that's the message when I go out there and talk to folks is, I know what it's like to be at the bottom in economic development. When I took over in 2010, Prince George's County was near the bottom. But by the time I left, we led the state and still lead the state.
Your predecessor was Jack Johnson, correct, Rushern?
Yes. Who
went to jail for corruption. Right.
Who went to jail for corruption. And the economy collapsed. We were leading in foreclosures. Our school system was, near the bottom. But we were able to actually deal with those issues. And I think that's what you're going to find out, whether you're in Western Maryland, Eastern Shore. I'm willing to bet, and I'll let the councilwoman, talk for herself, but I'm sure as chair of the council, she's had to deal with a lot of these issues right in Montgomery County.
Absolutely. One of the extraordinary things about Montgomery County and Prince George's County as well is that we're very diverse geographically, right? So we have everything. We have rural areas, we have urban centers, we have established single family homes, neighborhoods. So we have everything. And, I always say that all of us really, truly desire the same things, right? In terms of what we think about quality of life, we're all thinking about the same thing: public safety, high quality education, making sure we have access to transportation, housing that is appropriate. All of those things, we all want that. Except that, and this is something that I, advocate for so much here in Montgomery County, except that you also have to be sensitive to what are the particular needs of each community. And so you have to tailor some of those initiatives, some of those approaches to each community. It's the same thing with our state. And of course, I also had to focus on that, being someone who has served on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, because it is about the region. And so you have to think about, what are the challenges, but also the assets that you can leverage in each part of the region. It's the same thing with our state. And to me, that is what Rushern and I bring to the table, is an ease in being able to quickly assess and then respond, engaging with the community. That's the most important part, which is why public campaign finance is so important too, because we are here to listen to the community. We are not here to be somehow beholden to any particular large special interest. And so that bodes well for this particular ticket. And also it bodes well with connecting with Marylanders all throughout and being able to listen, to assess, and then deploy the kind of initiatives, resources, support that they need in order to maximize the potential in every part of the state.
So I have a good, interesting question here from my friend Isaac Snyder. Can either candidate go into one or two detailed examples of something they have accomplished in their county level position that could be expanded positive on a statewide level? Maybe something that is a unique issue to Maryland. That's a good question.
It's one that, Nancy and I will probably, we could spend the next hour talking about things that we'd like to scale up. But I'm gonna throw out one, and it won't be a surprise to Nancy, and then I'll turn it over to her, because I actually saw the question in the chat as we were talking about the nonprofit world and working at the state level. One of the things that I'm most proud of that we did at Prince George's County to deal with a lot of the issues was develop this thing called our Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative, which was we looked at 6 areas in Prince George's County where all the indicators were going in the wrong direction, not just crime and public safety, but also healthcare, health disparity, transportation, lack of job opportunities, where returning citizens were coming. And so we developed this program where we targeted those six areas during, with special attention from the county, that we would go in with our top government. We had a county administrator that was deputy county administrator that was in charge of those areas. But along with that county administrator that worked with the community, every part of the government was there in those community meetings. But the other part of it was we actually employed the nonprofit world and the business world in those communities. So in many cases, the nonprofit world acted as the stopgap. And some of our larger nonprofits came in to work with our school system, work with the healthcare. Imagine if we actually scaled that up, that we had our Maryland Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative, where we looked at parts of this great state of ours, not just in Baltimore, but in Western Maryland and Eastern Shore, where we went in with the same laser focus, bringing it from a top level, working with local nonprofits that understand the issues, but providing them with the resources and the things that they need to actually make a difference. In many cases, I'll close with this. Housing was a huge issue in Prince George's County. Dilapidated housing, abandoned housing, that were turning older Black communities, places where you could first move into Prince George's County after the Jim Crow laws were changed and people could move out here. But they had fallen to disrepair. And so what we did was we went in with our resources at the county level, but also we work with nonprofits to help them with the technical support to actually be the redevelopers of their own communities. We could do that in Baltimore City, Western Maryland, places in Montgomery County and throughout. And that's a program that I want to start that's scalable. It's also, I should say this, because if my good friend John Barron was here, he'd say, I want something, that's been tested and proven. And, I tell him all the time, just come to Prince George's County, I'll show you one. Because this program I'm talking about is one that we actually presented to the Kennedy School of Government at the County Executives of America for other folks to start using. And in fact, Chicago and Cook County and in places in Ohio actually adopted our program, but it started right here in Maryland. So that's one. Nancy.
Well, Rushern took, my favorite one, because I also coincidentally was working on something similar when I was on the Board of Education. So we were like on parallel tracks, but it was the same thing. It was called the Kennedy Cluster Project, and it's exactly the same concept. So I'm a huge fan of this particular proposal. I want to talk about something that I would love to scale up on the state level, because the state of New York actually did this. So in 2019, when I was council president, I dedicated my year to passing a racial equity and social justice law. This equity law, piece of legislation, it's rooted in prosperity. And what I mean about that is that what this does is that every time we make a decision, a budgetary decision, or the council makes a legislative decision, we have to have an impact note that shows us, how is this particular decision going to help close, or does it exacerbate issues around equity? And the reason why that is so critical, and because I chair the Fiscal Policy Committee, I'm going to talk about it from the fiscal perspective. Here in Montgomery County, we're really great at funding a lot of different programs, right? We have a lot of programs. Do we really know whether all those programs are actually effective in closing many of these gaps? Talking about gaps in access to healthcare, or the educational achievement gaps, or gaps in economic sufficiency, so we really don't know. We think we are, but when you look at it longitudinally, you realize that perhaps it hasn't really worked. And therefore, the most important thing that we can do is that every time an elected official, legislator, or a county executive makes a proposal, there should be an analysis to see if this is really going to help close these gaps or not. And that way we can save money, right? We can really truly fund those initiatives and interventions that have an impact. And most importantly, we will elevate quality of life for everybody. During this pandemic, I think we were able to see firsthand why it is that we just can't ignore these disparities. We knew in Montgomery County that the zip codes where our Black community lived had the highest mortality rate. And the zip codes where our Latino community lived, where they were concentrated, had the highest case rates. So if we didn't address those two issues, the county would have never been able to recover. And I proposed a Latino-centric COVID-19 initiative called Salud y Bienestar, and also an African-American health program initiative, which I literally handed to my colleague, Craig Rice, and said, please go replicate this in the Black community. And those two initiatives were able to close the vaccination gap rates in those communities and save lives, something that even today there are places in the country and they have not been able to do that. But why was that important? It was important because once we were able to stabilize the spread of the virus in those communities, then the rest of the county knew the community spread, right, was also going to go down. This is an example of how we are all connected. And so from a fiscal perspective, we need to address these issues of disparities and inequities. And also from all the high quality of life indicators, we need to address these issues and these disparities because Maryland is the most diverse state on the East Coast. We can't turn our heads. When it comes to education disparities, I'll close with this. Just think about this. The United States is the only developed country in the world that has an aging population, but also a young population. Except that young population, according to the census, is predominantly young people of color, meaning Black, Latino, or mixed. So if you look at it from that perspective, right? And I always joke that, hey, I want my Social Security, the Social Security fund to be okay when it comes time for me. We need to educate these young people. We need to make sure that our young people have the skill sets for the jobs of today and tomorrow. Because if we don't do that, then we're literally not going to be able to compete on a global scale unless we decide that we just want to import talent from China, from India, from other countries. We have an asset. And these disparities in education are going to be a problem for us going forward. We have had, organizations of retired generals that have said that this is also a national security issue, because unless we are able to prepare our young people, we are going to have a hard time recruiting, qualified individuals to all of our different armed forces. And so there are many, many areas that we need to see through that lens. And that is why the New York State actually took my piece of legislation and they passed it over there because they understand that this is something you have to do statewide. So that is one thing I would like to scale up. Here in Montgomery County, we have invested over $1 million in putting together that infrastructure. And already we're seeing a huge difference, as I just illustrated with these two COVID-19 initiatives that closed the vaccination rate between Latinos, African Americans, and the rest of our county population.
Let me ask you another question. I'm going to try and summarize them so I can get as many in as possible. Nancy Allison thanks us. Thanks both of you for coming. Thanks you for your ideas. They say they're going to cost money. How are these ideas going to be funded?
Well, the good thing with both Nancy and myself, we've actually had to deal with a budget, not a private sector budget, but an actual real budget from the state. And funding is always the issue. You know, as we both have dealt with, you know, I came in when the budget was $130 million deficit. And I also had to convince Wall Street why it was important for them to keep the AAA bond rating. But what we did is we invested. And so at the state level, what we will do is invest in those programs that we know will get a rate of return. And that doesn't mean simply, you know, we're going to, you know, just willy-nilly fund things, but we know there's a limited amount of funds available. So we'll invest in those programs that will help us. So working with the nonprofit community, as we've talked about at the top of this morning, that we see where we can actually invest in those nonprofit communities, which in the long run saves us at the state level, because one, we're not hiring people and paying Social Security and their health care. The nonprofits are, and we're supporting them, so we're closing the gap. The other thing is, I know firsthand, and sometimes when I hear other candidates talk about what they would do at the state level, I also know firsthand that state budgets are done in 2 and 4 year cycles. So money that people are talking about right now, like everyone's, you know, going goo goo gaga over all this federal money that's coming in, that literally is one-time money. That's capital. Everyone's spending it as if it's ongoing. It isn't. And we should treat it like investment, not treat it like this is actually going to pay for education for the next 20 years. It ain't. And so what we have to do is invest in areas that can help us immediately, but also build our economy. That's what both of us did. We were able to raise the minimum wage in Prince George's County because we built the economy. You know, and so at the state level, the number one issue we're going to face, and the reason why this ticket is so important, is you have to actually know how to build a government economy, not a private sector economy. They're different. Build a government economy right away, because you're going to need that in order to pay for the things that we want to do, whether it's adding on to our education system, which is now 10 years behind, you know, probably 12 years now that with COVID, our healthcare system. Now that we know that we haven't provided adequate healthcare throughout, but it requires that you build the economy, and then you be willing to hold the line with the legislators, my former colleagues in places I've served on sticking to the priorities. The last thing I'll say, and I'll turn it over to Nancy, is not understanding how you have to work hand in glove with the local governments. Anybody coming in as governor and talks about what they will do by themselves, they're lying, or they don't understand how government actually works. Whether it's education, healthcare, Social Security, all of that, you have to work with the local government, whether it's Baltimore City Mayor, whether it's a county executive. One, because health officers at every level are appointed by the governor and the county executive. The Secretary of Social Security, social work, at the state level and at the county level or joint appointments. And in order to do investment and create jobs, you have to work together. You know, we built our economy by going to Governor O'Malley and saying, you have to help us because we're going to help the state. But if you don't understand how that works and you think it's just a place in Annapolis, it's not going to work that way. The economy is built by working hand in glove with those at the local level, because one, they handle all of the zoning issues that are there. They also handle most of the stuff that deals with healthcare and with education. And so I think we'll be able to do it without raising taxes. We will be able to do it because we know how to build the economy, investing in there, but also holding the line on things that making sure that we're not spending money that's going to waste.
You answered a question about not raising tax. I'm going to ask you one final question, and then if you want to just go right into a summation of 30 seconds or a minute or so after I ask you this question about to wrap up, economic development, the key to our future success, drawing companies, starting small businesses, doing the things that are going to provide solid, well-paying middle-class jobs. That means there's actually a tax base for the future. That means that we're actually continuing to lead in education. That means that we continue to be a great place to live, work, and raise a family. What is, a simple outline of your economic development strategy to keep Maryland at the forefront of creating well-paying jobs and keeping our state economically healthy? Rushern and Nancy, and if you also want to then, after that, then just take a few seconds to close with any ideas, and we'll call it a day. And thank you again for the third, and I apologize for the third time for our technical difficulty. We've had about 50 Zooms so far this year and the technical difficulty does in no way imply a lack of endorsement or support or any other critique of our two candidates here. It's on our end, and we apologize. Economic development, Rushern. Economic development, Nancy.
I'll let Nancy go first, as I hogged up a lot of the time.
What I would say is that, and I'll talk about the overall framing, and Rushern can talk about some of the specific things that he does want to scale up because they have been proven. It is so important to look at economic development from what I call these important quadrants. We have to set the stage for success. And so that includes that we have to pay attention to our investments and how we leverage and position transportation. That's very important for our entire state. We have to look at housing, because companies are not going to want to move to the state of Maryland unless they know that they can access housing for their employees. We have to look at workforce development. How are we strategically making sure that we have the people ready to access these jobs? Rushern Baker did a really amazing job at that, about being intentional. You can't just let it happen with a huge bureaucracy. You have to be very intentional and very strategic. And you have to start with partnering with the different LEAs, the education systems of each particular area, because those opportunities should start really signaling it in middle school, and you go to high school, and then you make sure that you partner with your institutions of higher learning so that you can produce the kind of workforce that you need for these strategic industry areas. That's super important. And that also addresses these issues of, equity. So the business, attraction, development, retention is rooted in all of those components. Public safety, of course, is absolutely key as well. And so for me, and for Rushern, it's about noticing and paying attention to those elements and making sure that we're partnering with the local jurisdictions. It's not about just throwing money at it. It's about how do you align, realign, how did you leverage the extraordinary assets that we already have here in the state with all the federal agencies and all of these other, ecosystems all throughout, but also in areas that are more agriculture. How do we leverage all those assets, looking at it from those lens of those quadrants that I just described? To me and to Rushern, it's about paying attention of all those components, because you cannot be just single focus or work in silos. You have to understand that it's an ecosystem, and that ecosystem has to be seen through that comprehensive, holistic lens.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree with of course, everything that Nancy said. And I think our record shows this. The difference between us and the other folks that are running is we've had to deal with this problem in real time. Someone didn't write a paper for us, or we're not guessing as to whether this could work or not work. We actually were faced with it. And so in the county, when I came in, I didn't come in as somebody who wanted to build the economic system. I wanted to solve, the problems in our education system and healthcare. And found out that without expanding our job opportunities, that we actually couldn't deal with the other two problems. And so I had to refocus on how do we actually create jobs? How do we invest in the county? At the same time, knowing that we were underwater, both in terms of our county and in terms of our housing market. And so what I did, which sounded crazy at the time, was I went into our rainy day fund and I took $50 million and put it aside for the Economic Development Incentive Fund, and said, guess what? We're going to invest in ourselves, which means we're going to invest in those businesses, both small and medium size, both nonprofit and private sector, that are right now creating job opportunities in our county. Wall Street thought it was crazy, but I told them it will work. If we invest in ourselves, then we can attract businesses here. And then if we grow our business economy, then we can provide more money for education, for healthcare, and paying people higher. So we took $50 million. We were the largest economic incentive fund there is in the state. The state has a $100 million economic development incentive fund that's controlled by the Secretary of Commerce. Why can't at the state level we boost that up to, use some of these federal funds, boost it up to $200 million? Because you take those funds, you combine it with the local funds, and then you invest in small and medium-sized businesses that do most of the hiring. You know, the big sexy thing everybody always talks about, but it's really the hiring at the local level that's going to be sustainable, is investing in those areas. And so that's what we did as a county. And it allowed us slowly to bring in our economy back, which allowed us to raise our minimum wage, to put more into our education system, and then to go after the bigger projects like an MGM or like a Whole Foods in our development or other projects. But it was really understanding that you can do it around our metro systems, that you have to have the governor's office willing to do that. We were able to do it because we stayed on Governor O'Malley and got him to invest in it. By the time Governor Hogan came around, you know, we were well on our way. They invested less. I think if we'd had an aggressive governor that understands you have to focus on this and you have to be intentional, as Nancy said, about this, that we can do that. Well, we've had to do it in both our jurisdictions, and we know how to do it across the state. We don't have to learn about it. We don't have to have a white paper. We can actually do it. And so that's what I would do, because I think that's the number one issue that's going to help us. But it also means, you know, being willing to stand with the folks and say, hey, we're going to invest in these nonprofits because they can actually do the work. We're going to invest in this small business. Yes, they may have one store, they may have 5 employees, but they're going to expand. We can do it around things that we talk about. We created the only Department of the Environment in Prince George's County. And everybody's like, oh my God, Rushern wants to hug trees. No, I want to create jobs. That Department of Environment created more jobs because we started doing solar, recycling. We went from 2-day-a-week trash to 1 day a week. And we actually built an economy where folks who didn't think they were part of the green economy, you know, now all of a sudden became part of it. So that's what we want to do. I want to close with this. You know, we talked about at the very beginning, you know, Ron talked about how are you going to fund your campaign and deal with, you know, the fact that folks have raised millions of dollars from around the country and everywhere else.
Rushern, I don't know if everybody knows that you're accepting public financing. Most of the other candidates are not.
Right. So we're the only campaign that's accepting public financing. And that's not because, you know, as a former county executive with no restrictions, because I put restrictions on me last time that said I couldn't take developer money, because I wanted to make sure that people understood that every project I did as county executive was based on it was a good project, not because some person could give me money. I don't have that restriction now. You know, I can raise millions of dollars from around the country. Nancy is a current councilwoman. Certainly somebody businesses want to invest in. We did this on purpose because we actually want to hear from voters. And we also believe as Democrats, you know, not the Democratic Party, but as people who believe in democracy, that the best way to do that is to actually have people invest in your campaign and invest in your ideas. So if you're supporting Baker Navarro, you're doing it because you believe we are the best people that can lead forward, not because you're giving $6,000 to everybody or because we're flying to Chicago or New York or wherever. And so for us, since the Democratic Party, since they passed this bill and says we don't want to have just a Republican governor, Larry Hogan, use public financing to win. We want to actually see if we can change the way we do campaigns and thereby change laws, you know, and throughout the state. And so we're very excited about the fact that this campaign is where it is, and that we're now starting to see the funds from public financing from real people in Maryland who can vote for us, who can tell us you will be beholden only to them, that we're seeing this now come out, and we're going to be able to compete with folks who've gotten their money from elsewhere. And don't begrudge them. But for us, our philosophy starts with the way that we raise our money. And that's the way we're going to govern. We've seen too much of the dark money, and it firsthand. All of these things that we see around this country with Trump and folks who believe in that, all of that comes from and is funded by these dark money, these PACs. Enough of that. Let's stand up and actually believe and do what we say we believe in. And that's what this campaign will do. So thank you for giving us your time this morning. We certainly appreciate it.
First of all, on that final note, I'd like to go ahead and also make a request. And first of all, thank you very much, Rushern and Nancy, for giving us additional time. And I really do appreciate the fact that you were patient with us and that you gave us such wonderful, inspiring, and comprehensive answers. I'm going to ask you that should you become governor and lieutenant governor, that you please, that whenever there is an episode of bigotry or anti-Semitism or anything, to please be strong, forthright, and unequivocally condemn it from the minute you hear it happen. Because there's nothing that's more reassuring to the Jewish community than to have non-Jewish leaders stand up without having to be asked to do so. And the second thing I would ask is that if you would please make sure that you stand forthrightly and unequivocally against BDS, which shows to hurt Israel, and that you go ahead and continue. I've been with the last 3 governors on economic missions to Israel, and I think you went with Peter to Israel, Rushern, if I remember, but I don't know if you ever went to it, but I know Nancy.
I did not. My wife was sick, so I didn't get to go. So this is going to be our first trip, our first mission as governor and lieutenant governor. We're going to Israel.
I was going to ask it, you said it, and I look forward to joining you on that, because there are over 30 Maryland businesses that have more than that are in. And by the way, about 20 of those are in Montgomery County. So we look forward to, if you become governor, joining you on a trip to Israel. For everybody, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Nice to see so many friends, and we look forward to continuing to see you on our future series. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.